Yep, good connection. OBS 3 has got a new control panel uh, for the YouTube. It monitors the YouTube stream rather than having to have it up in a separate window. I suppose that's useful. Alrighty. Oh, Audacity.
Test, test. Test, test.
Uh-oh.
Okay, all good.
No, because I'm still hearing you when you shut that off.
Really?
Yeah. Let's see here.
Because it says my audio source is the HyperX Quadcast.
Yeah, that's what mine says too.
Let me switch away. Switch. Okay, I see. That should fix it. Can you still?
You're good now.
All right. Test. I'm gonna have to rebuild this mic mount. Probably my camera mount too.
Did they make one for that microphone? That's a shock
There's one
mount?
that came with it. Oh, it's got a shock mount
Oh,
built
okay.
onto it. It came with an adapter to make it fit onto a standard mic mount. But when I got this, I traded a tablet for it, and it didn't come with that adapter, so I had to 3D print my own.
Right. Looks solid.
Yeah, I did a good job. Just I don't like. Well, I should have recessed the the nut so that way it doesn't spin, and then I can just tighten it from the other side. Either that or put a wing nut on the end, or made my own.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see a little bit of a machine screw sticking out there.
Yeah. Plus, plastic doesn't last forever.
No, unfortunately. All right, well, I'm ready when you are.
Ready for what?
Ready to get started. Ready to do
Start what?
Audacity.
Oh, you want me to do the numbers?
Uh, if you want.
Okay, so are you hosting or am I hosting?
It's probably my turn, isn't it?
I have no clue. I don't know when I last hosted.
I think you hosted it. Well, I don't remember, but I know I haven't done one in a while.
Okay, I will let you do it then. Okay, let's start with our threes and twos and ones.
All right.
So three, two, one, record. Okay, let's do our 3, 2, 1, 0. 3, 2, 1, 0.
0.
Good enough for government work.
That was about perfect on my end.
And there was about a second and a half delay.
All right. Looks like everything's recording, everything's streaming. Ha. Okay. And we got 3 people watching. Welcome to mintCast, the podcast by the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 427. This is episode 427.5, recorded on Sunday, December 10th, 2023.
Here for the beer, I'm Joe.
Christmas shopping is kind of like Mondays, it never seems to end. I'm Bill. First up in the news, Linux Mint 21.3, codenamed Virginia, beta released. Mint Monthly News, November 2023. GNOME Shell updates on Ubuntu 23.10. Zorin has a new desktop. Calibre offers new formats. KDE fixes bugs ahead of Plasma 6. Intel does some driver code cleanup. Canonical ports multipass to Qt6. Linux 6.8 is dropping support for very old graphics drivers. In security and privacy, stealthy Linux rootkit found in the wild after going undetected for 2 years. Then in our wanderings, I'm mumbling for a straight week. Joe is droning on, and that's it. Only 2 of us.
Okay, Moss says that our audio sounds like garbage.
I need better information than that.
Well, his specific words were Bill's a lot quieter than Joe, and Joe's mic is too hot. So I turned down my mic. Hopefully that fixes the issue. But I listened to some of it. It didn't sound hot.
No, you sound fine to me. How's this sound? A lot louder?
A lot louder. But I have my own volume control, so I guess it's relative to one another.
Yeah. Okay. In our innards section, we talk about, well, originally we were going to talk about audio editing, but now I think we're going to freeform it. And finally, the feedback and a couple of suggestions. No, really, we've got feedback this time.
Yeah, good feedback.
Yeah. On to the news. Linux Mint 21.3 Virginia beta released. And this is from the Linux Mint blog via Londoner. About 3.5 hours ago, the release of Mint 21.3 beta was officially announced in the usual 3 desktop environments. To see what's new, go to linuxmint.com / well, there's links in the show notes to that and the release notes. Please be reminded that 1, this beta release might contain critical bugs. Please only use it for testing purposes and to help the Linux Mint team fix issues prior to the stable release. 2, upgrade instructions will be published after the stable release of Linux Mint 21.3. And 3, it will be possible to upgrade from this beta to the stable release. And finally, 4, It will also be possible to upgrade from Linux Mint 21 to Linux Mint 21.1. One of our previous guests switched to Linux already has a video on the beta on YouTube, and there's a link to that in the full show notes too.
Okay, next up. Unless you got something else you want to say about that.
No, not really. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Yeah, me either.
Londoner literally just added this to the notes probably a couple
Yeah.
hours ago.
Yeah, and I'm not big on playing with the betas. I don't know.
Not
It's just
really.
me.
I could see why they exist, and it's valuable for the people that do have the chops and the time to test stuff. But I got to have something on here that I know is going to work.
Yeah. Up
So,
next, Mint Monthly News, November 2023, also via Londoner from the Linux Mint blog. Nemo Actions. Starting with Cinnamon 6.0, you'll be able to download, enable, and rate actions the same way as applets, desklets, extensions, and Cinnamon themes. This will include actions such as verify and make bootable USB stick in the context menu when right-clicking on ISO files. Wayland support. There is now a dedicated GitHub repository for issues related to Wayland, whether they need fixing in Cinnamon, in XApp project, a Mint tool, or any other software project maintained by the Mint team. Hypnotics recently received the ability to set favorite channels. It will also feature the ability to create custom channels. In Slick Reader, the login screen, the alignment of login box is now configurable. Bulky, the batch file renaming tool, receives support for thumbnails and drag and drop. In Pix, video playback now takes the video orientation into account and automatically rotates it. Now that is interesting. We talked, I think it was either last show or the show before, about Mint eventually moving to Wayland in what was it going to be, 23? No,
I think I heard him say like 20. The next full
20.
LTS, somewhere in the middle of that process.
Okay.
It's going to be a little while, but we're going to have access to it prior to that. It just won't be official until then, which I don't have a huge problem with that, to be
Well,
honest.
I hope. Well, with all of the different, you know, flavors slowly switching to Wayland or not so slowly switching to Wayland, I'm hoping that it does get more X Wayland support, and I'm also hoping that screen mirroring improves and screen sharing improves.
Yeah, because right now it's really hit and miss with some of that stuff. But I mean, we're miles ahead of where we were a year or two ago. But there's still work to be done.
Right.
And
I tried playing with Wayland when it first came out, like a
oh
decade
yeah,
gone, and yeah, it wasn't worth it then, but and I've kind of ignored it until now when it started taking over again. So hopefully,
the story on Plasma is pretty good. I've been using it on Plasma for well over a year now, and the it's good enough now to where there's not enough problems with it to warrant going back to X, and um, the few things that didn't work so well, there's kind of workarounds for that. Um, the only problem I'm still having on Plasma is the look and feel of GNOME apps, or GTK apps, I should say, on Plasma is still a little bit shaky. And I remember them saying not long ago that they had improved that. I've yet to see that, but uh, I'm sure it's just a matter of time. The other thing about this, I'm really kind of impressed how much attention Hypnotics gets um, nowadays, with everybody using Netflix and YouTube and stuff like that. And you got Pluto and all that, you know.
yeah. Well, I like Hypnotics.
I do
You
too.
know, I've tested it out. I've tried it. It seems really cool, but I just don't have a mainstream use for it. And I have Plex and I have Netflix and I
Right.
have Amazon Prime Video and all that jazz, and I just don't use it. I like it. It's just, yeah, it's there.
It's impressive, though, I suppose. There are some people that use it, and the people that use it rave about it. So, fair play to them. Anyway, Moving on, GNOME Shell 45.2 update rolling out to Ubuntu 23.10. And this is from OMG Ubuntu. The first point release to GNOME Shell 45 only hit Ubuntu 23.10 at the end of last month, and now a second one is already on its way. GNOME Shell 45.2 was released upstream at the start of December. Now Ubuntu's developers have packaged it up and pushed it out to users of Ubuntu 23.10. It hit the Mantic proposed repo today, so assuming no unexpected issues are found in the coming days, the update will be pushed onto all other users through the regular update channel in the coming week or two. Think of it as an early Christmas treat. As with GNOME Shell 45.1, the latest point release is a bug fix bonanza. All manner of errant issues have addressed, including several that pertain to performance, including a fix in performance degradation due to repeated signal leak, optimized application search, fix on-screen keyboard backspace getting stuck, fix arrow navigation in search results, support async code in eval dbus method, or eval, I'm sure there's a name for that symbol, it's two parentheses, dbus method, fix sliders not requesting any size, only show prefs dialog after the extension has been loaded, improve high contrast styling, fix mapping of tablet rings slash strips, add support for version name fields in extension meta info. And for those of you that understand what half of that means, I'm sure you're very excited.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add to that. I mean, pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay, Zorin OS 17 beta includes new spatial desktop features. I'm going to have that explained to me. A beta build of the upcoming Zorin OS 17 release is available to download. Zorin OS 17 sees the Ubuntu-based distro rebase on top of Ubuntu 2204 LTS. But interestingly, it includes GNOME 43 rather than GNOME 42, which is the version included in Ubuntu 2204. Given the substantial leap from GNOME 3.38 used in previous Zorin OS releases, this version offers much improved performance and several major user experience changes, such as a horizontal workspace switcher, interactive screenshot tool, and button-based quick settings menu. Zorin OS 17 builds out from those solid foundations with a slew of GNOME Shell extensions. Amongst them is an enhanced Zorin menu extension. Aside from launching apps, this now lets you search for files, calendar appointments, contacts, world clocks. Anything the standard GNOME Shell overview is able to do or show, the Zorin menu can now do or show too. And as an upstream GNOME Shell, you can turn search providers helpers on or off from the Settings app. You can download the Zorin OS 17 beta from the project website.
Now, as far as what spatial means, I think when I saw the article on OMG Ubuntu, they had a little demonstration going on video, and it looked like, I think what they're talking about is this new desktop visualization thing, like the old Compies cube that puts all the desktops on each side of the cube. Except with this one, instead of having a perfect cube, it's kind of got the desktops arranged at a 90-degree angle from each other, and then the applications in those desktops sit out in front of the image of the desktop. So it's kind of a three-dimensional all the way around, and you can articulate this image. But there's a link in the show notes to go and look at that. I don't know how it's interesting. I don't know how useful stuff like that is, and I'm really surprised that people invest in that kind of thing, because I think that literally just got added back to the the KDE thing, the KWin. Uh, it was a feature in KWin, and then they dropped it for a long time, and now it's back. Must be by popular demand. I don't know. But then again, I use the wobbly windows too on
That's
Plasma. It's
probably useful to people that have used it and are familiar with it.
yeah, just a silly little funky thing people do just to show off, or it might, I don't know, all the reasons you can't think of, I suppose.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Caliber ebook app now supports audio EPUBs and custom notes. And this is from Joey Snedden at OMG Ubuntu. Now, I said it that way. I said it's from Joey Snedden because this is going to read a lot more like a blog post than a news article. Um, if Caliber, the popular open source ebook manager, was a book itself, it'd surely be a perennial bestseller, thanks to an exhaustive, multifaceted feature set. And in the latest Caliber 7 release, the feature set expands yet further. The latest version introduces a clutch of new capabilities to the manager's existing roster of ebook conversion, syncing, reading, and editing options. Among the new features in Caliber 7.x, to me, the standout, and me being Joey, the standout addition in Caliber 7.0 is the ability to store notes linked to various book attributes within your Caliber library. You can stash notes related to authors, publishers, book series, and more so you can keep track of information relevant to you. Using this in Caliber 7 and up is super easy. Just right click on an author or tag name in the tag browser or book detail panel, click edit notes, and away you go. To browse and search all notes you've added to your library, just push Control Shift N, N as in no. Or you can edit the toolbar and add a browse notes option to it. Another great sounding
Oh,
enhancement is support for audio EPUBs.
okay.
Uh,
Let's pause right there. I want to take this in kind of sections. It's a bit of a big article, and I am excited by this. The
yeah, it's interesting.
Caliber update, yeah. The audio EPUBs, I do want to know about that. But for now, is this like the notes portion, the sort of a Cliff Notes thing? I wonder if there's a way to like share those, or if there will be in the future.
It
So
would
that
be
way,
interesting to find out because if you can, well, the use case I was thinking about had more to do with like research and um, I don't know,
right, for
learning.
yourself, research, highlighting specific things. But if you look at like Cliff Notes, those get passed around in a college, so people
Right?
get an
Yeah,
idea of what other people saw in it, and what they and compare it to what they saw themselves, and then that can help them with studying and things like that. I'm just wondering if that's a future possibility, and how well that would work, because that seems like a good idea. I like that
it
particular
does.
feature. Okay.
Okay, another great sounding enhancement is support for audio EPUBs, i.e., EPUB 3.0 spec. These allow video and audio to be embedded in a file alongside text. So that's even cooler. So if you prefer to listen to ebooks rather than read them, this will be welcome. Alas, patent restrictions can mean playing audio ebooks and Caliber 7.0 and above may not work as it should on Linux, though your mileage will, as they say, vary. So try it out and let me know. Caliber 7 also lets you attach data files relevant to the book with that book and manage and access said data within the app. What kind of data? Well, that's up to you, but it might be PDFs, web links, office documents slash essays, images, etc. Finally, Caliber 7 has its own private recycle bin, which Caliber says makes it easier to undo book deletion with a click and restoring all its files and metadata automatically. Similar to other apps, when you delete a book within Caliber, a temporary undo dialog is shown. As always, users are encouraged to update to the latest version of Caliber to take advantage of the latest new features. but also benefit from bug fixes, performance tweaks, and interoperability buffs. In all, Calibre remains a versatile and user friendly ebook management solution, and this latest update underlines the project's commitment to providing practical features that cater to every aspect of the ebook experience. To download Calibre 7.x, head to the Calibre's website down page, and there's a link to that in the show notes, where you'll find a command to download Calibre for Linux as a binary build. The developers advise using this over distributed provided Calibre package, distribution provided package, as those often are buggy and outdated. You can also install Calibre from FlatHub if you want a less obtuse way of getting it. Though, as far as I can tell, that package is not official, so keep in mind if you're likely to be filling out bug reports from using it. And yeah,
Well, okay, so I was hoping for a bit more when it came to the audio portion there. But that's still interesting. I was hoping that either it would also, collate and act as a library for audiobooks as well as ebooks, or that it would incorporate a reader, like one of the just actually, the voice aloud things, text to speech. But it doesn't look like that's the case. But still interesting. Now, I have found some good like audio readers, and I'd love to see them incorporated with Calibre. All right, go ahead. You had something to say?
oh, I was just going to say it does. It's not real clear here whether those features are going to be kind of added, but I think you've got the groundwork for all that now, and as time goes on, if it's not a part of it, it'll probably get added to it because
Yeah,
it's
it
I
seems like what you can do is attach an audio file to the ebook, and then the other things that it was talking about there with adding like PDFs and things like that sounds more like creating a Cliff Notes type
yeah,
of thing and adding things to it, which is what we were talking about at first.
or almost like the way Wikipedia works, where you've got in some articles you've got audio files attached to it that it's just kind of a link to something playing somewhere, and then the images and things. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of interested in. I've been thinking about setting up a Calibre server, and that way I can use Calibre or something equivalent to it on the Android side when I'm on the road and that, because there is
Well, I have found Calibre to be useful, especially when it comes to like bulk moving like file types, like
yeah.
actually making it an EPUB or because I hate trying to do PDFs usually unless I'm doing a comic, and even then CBR is a little bit better, even though it's just like glorified PDF. But yeah, it's good
I
for.
mean, it's just another good way to keep your if you do have a lot of PDFs for like technical writing and things like that. It's a good way to keep those organized.
Well, I
And
use Calibre in conjunction with Audio Bookshelf, which does
yeah.
have the ability to also do ebooks, which is how I get them to my phone.
Oh, cool.
So you might try an Audio Bookshelf instance.
Yeah, I've got a server. I've got an audio bookshelf server running, and then of course, I've used yours too.
Right.
But
Well, if you've
that's
used
another.
mine, if you all my ebooks are on there as well. You just have to switch from the book section to the ebook section.
Oh, right.
Heck, my podcasts are on there too. They should still be automatically downloading. We'll have to verify.
Now I knew it did podcasts. I wasn't aware that it did ebooks, but that
Yep.
would be a good solution.
Well, Audio Bookshelf can be rather interesting when it comes to like organizing things. Like if your stuff's not named correctly, then it won't come up correct. And Calibre is great for doing that automatically. the setting up the file structure and the folder structure and everything like that. And Audio Bookshelf just handles the distribution to me, since I'm already doing it for audio anyway.
Right.
But we should move on probably.
Right on.
KDE developers continue on bug fixing spree ahead of Plasma 6.0. It's a Christmas season of bug fixing in the KDE world, as following the late November Plasma 6.0 Beta 1, they've shifted from feature work to fixes, and with the new test release has received an influx of bug reports. KDE developer Nate Graham is out with his weekly development summary, which for this week mostly amounts to a lot of bug fixing, and then just a couple of new features were squeezed in. First up, when using KDE automatic bug reporting, the system notification telling you about the crash can now allow the user to optionally provide a message for developers to help better explain the crash. I see that as a bad idea. Secondly, and as already covered in Phoronix, there is now KWin DMA Fence deadline support for helping improve the performance and responsiveness on systems when using integrated graphics with the Plasma Wayland session. The rest of the KDE development work this week was focused on fixing mass amounts of bugs. More details on these Plasma 6.0 bug fixes for the week can be found via Nate's blog, link in the show notes. Plasma 6.0 remains on track for releasing at the end of February.
Plasma continues to be one of the most aggressively developed pieces of software or suites of software that's out there, because I update my laptop once a week, and every single time it's got to be at least 100 KDE things or Plasma things, especially if you do the whole, if you install everything that comes by default with the KDE apps meta package, it's an awful lot. And I tell you what, they when there's a bug, they get on it. So it's good to see these things, and I'm looking forward to Plasma 6. Anyway,
Yeah. Oh, good.
if we're ready to move on,
Yep.
Intel is striving to overhaul their multiple Ethernet Linux drivers. They're dubbing it the Great Code Dedupe, and this is Phoronix.com. Intel engineers maintain multiple Ethernet drivers in the Linux kernel for their wide range of networking hardware, from consumer to high-end data center wares. There's been an ongoing effort to overhaul their Ethernet driver management to reduce code duplication between the different drivers for better code sharing, and with an end goal of more unification. Sent out on Thursday was the sixth iteration of this ongoing work that is dubbed the Great Code Dedupe, for deduplicating, for anybody that didn't pick up on that. All of the redundant code between Intel's several Ethernet Linux drivers. Intel networking driver engineer Alexander Lubakin, I apologize, explained in that latest patch series, and I quote, "Not a secret, there's a ton of code duplication between two or more Intel Ethernet modules. Before introducing new changes, which would need to be copied over again, start decoupling the already existing duplicate functionality into a new module, which will be shared between several Intel Ethernet drivers." The first name that came to my mind was Libby Intel Ethernet Common Library. Okay. Also, this sounds like lovely. One word, no Libiepls. Okay. And can be expanded as Lib Internet Explorer. Oh. The series is only the beginning. From now on, adding every new feature or doing any good driver restoring will remove much more lines than add for quite some time. There's a basic roadmap with some deduplications planned already. Not speaking of that touching every line now asks, can I share this? The final destination is very ambitious. Have only one unified driver for at least I-80E, ICE, IAVF, and IDPF with a struct ops for each generation. That's never going to happen, right? But you can still at least try. PP conversation for IAVF lands within the same series as those two are tied closely. Uh, LIBIE will support page pool model only so that a driver can't use much of the LIB until it's converted. IAVF is only the example. The rest will eventually be converted soon on a peer driver basis. That is when it gets really interesting. Stay tech, unquote. At the moment, these patches lead to over 2,000 lines of code being dropped while adding just 1K or 1,000 lines of new code for the proposed LIBIE commonized code. In the end, this should lead to better drive maintenance and code sharing for the Intel Ethernet drivers. It will be interesting to see what next features they have in mind for their Ethernet drivers once this great code dedupe is complete. And the only thing I'm taking from this is that it's cleaning up, it's simplifying, and that's got to be a good thing.
It's deduplicating.
It's deduplicating. I've heard that word when talking about ButterFS and ZFS.
Well, yeah, but those are functions of your drive system, your file
Yeah,
system to deduplicate your own files. This
right.
is deduplicating, drivers.
Which, if anybody ever takes one of those stat tools and looks at their root directory, like the biggest thing, if you're on a Debian or Ubuntu based distribution, about the biggest thing on there is the Linux firmware package.
Mm.
And anything you can do to clean up some of that, because as time goes on, I'm not a developer, but I can only imagine that as time goes on, corrupt just builds up, especially with software that's got multiple tens of thousands or even millions of lines of code.
Yep.
So,
But moving on, Canonical releases Multipass 1.13 RC with snapshot support migrated to Qt6. This is from Veronix. Canonical's multipass software that is advertised as cloud-style VMs at your fingertips and making it easy to spin up Ubuntu VMs on demand for any workstation is out with a new test release, adding snapshot support and other new features. Thursday's release of Multipass 1.13 RC is significant in that it finally adds supports for snapshots. Similar to VM snapshots, multipass snapshots allow taking a snapshot of an instance that can be easily restored at a later date. So should you mess up an instance, you can easily roll back if a snapshot was made previously. Multipass 1.13 also migrates from Qt5 to Qt6, which in turn fixes a number of bugs in the process. Multipass 1.3 has also seen some parts of its cross-platform SFTP server rewritten. Fetching of remote image information is now faster, and various other updates. Multipass 1.13 RC can be easily fetched via beta updates on Snap or the source fetched from GitHub. Those unfamiliar with this canonical open source software project geared for Ubuntu Linux can learn more about the project at multipass.run. Link in the show notes. Well, it's always good to have other backup options.
yep. Because if it ain't backed up, you don't own it. All right. Linux 6.8 dropping support for very old graphics drivers. This is from Veronix.com. A new DRM MISC next pull request was sent today to DRM Next, bringing a few notable changes for the upcoming Linux 6.8 merge window. First up, today's pull removes the user space mode switching IOCTLS from the kernel mode setting that has been preferred for many years now by the Linux desktop, while the user space mode setting interfaces have remained. Earlier this year in Linux 6.3, a number of old and unmaintained drivers were removed for obsolete graphics hardware. For Linux 6.8, the old UMS infrastructure is being removed to finally say goodbye to the old UMS world. When it comes to new code in this week's DRM MSC Next pull, the V3D driver adds support for CPU jobs. This Broadcom V3D driver will work is focused on the Raspberry Pi single board computers to better handle Vulkan and being able to handle more work on the CPU side for where the Broadcom video core graphics hardware isn't accommodating enough for Vulkan API needs. New to Linux 6.8 in the DRM world is the Imagination Power VR DRM driver. This week's pull has added a number of fixes on this newly queued driver code. More detail on the other DRM MSC NEXT feature changes for the week can be found via this pull request, which is linked in the show docs here. I can always tell when an article is meant to be read silently because because of the way things are kind of spelled out that way, you know. But that's I
Yeah, that was an interesting one to read.
I'm sure some people probably handle it better than I do. I'm also not sure what I'm looking at either. I understand that it becomes necessary as time goes on. I was just thinking though, for people that still have this hardware, what options do they have if they really need to keep this thing working? Are they just stuck on an older kernel or
Well, you can find the modules from the older kernel and then force load them
yeah,
onto the new one, which is probably what most of them end up having to do. But, you know, it's fewer and fewer people over time. So,
right. But again, cleanup is good. Make room for more crusty code. Anyway, that's it for the news. Moving on to security and privacy. Joe?
okay, first up in security and privacy, stealthy Linux rootkit found in the wild after going undetected for 2 years. This is from Ars Technica. Krasu infects telecom firms in Thailand using techniques for staying under the radar. Stealthy and multifunctional Linux malware that has been infecting telecommunications companies went largely unnoticed for 2 years until being documented for the first time by researchers on Thursday. Researchers from security firm Group IB have named the remote access Trojan Krasu, after a nocturnal spirit depicted in Southeast Asian folklore, floating in midair with no torso, just her intestines hanging from below her chin. That's not graphic at all. The researchers chose the name because evidence to date shows
Wow.
it almost exclusively targets victims in Thailand and poses a severe risk to critical systems and sensitive data, given that it is able to grant attackers remote access to the targeted network. According to the researchers, Krasu is a Linux remote access Trojan that has been active since 2020 and predominantly targets organizations in Thailand. Group IB can confirm that the telecommunications companies were targeted by Krasu. The malware contains several embedded rootkits to support different Linux kernel versions. And I'm sure I'm torturing that name. Krasu's rootkit is drawn from public sources, 3 open source Linux kernel module rootkits, as is the case with many Linux rootkits. The rootkit can hook the kill syscall, network-related functions, and file listing operations in order to hide its activities and evade detection. Notably, Krasu uses RTSP, real-time streaming protocol messages, to serve as a disguised alive ping, a tactic rarely seen in the wild. The Linux malware Group IB, researchers presume, is deployed during the later stages of an attack chain in order to maintain access to a victim host. Krasu is likely to either be deployed as part of a botnet or sold by initial access brokers to other cybercriminals. Group IB researchers believe that Krasu was created by the same author as the Zord-DDoS Linux Trojan documented by Microsoft in March 2022 blog post, link in the show notes, or someone who had access to the latter source code. During the initialization phase, the rootkit conceals its own presence. It then proceeds to hook the kill syscall network-related functions and file listing operations, thereby obscuring its activities and evading detection. The researchers have so far been able to determine precisely. Excuse me, let me reread that. The researchers have so far been unable to determine precisely how Krasu gets installed. Possible infection vectors include through vulnerability exploitation, credential stealing, or guessing attacks, or by unwittingly being installed as Trojan, stashed in an installation file or update masquerading as legitimate software. The 3 open source rootkit packages incorporated into Krasu are Diamorphine, Suturuso, and Rudy. Rootkits are a type of malware that hides directories, files, processes, and other evidence of its presence to the operating system it's installed on. By hooking legitimate Linux processes, the malware is able to suspend them at select points and interject functions that conceal its presence. Specifically, it hides files and directories, beginning with the names odd and VMware helper, from directory listings, and hides port 52695 and 52699, where communications to attacker-controlled servers occur. Intercepting the kill syscall also allows the Trojan to survive Linux commands attempting to abort the program and shut it down. Whew.
So, yeah, that's a complicated one, as Ars Technica articles tend to be. I've been curious about rootkits for some time. I've never actually seen it explained that way. I'm not
I don't
sure
know.
how.
I'd have to do some research. I haven't ever actually researched a rootkit to see what it is or how it works.
Yeah, I always assumed it was just some process by which to fool the system into believing an application or a function or an execution has root privileges.
A series of root level tools
Yeah. So
for access and control.
interesting. Moving on, feds warn health sector to watch for open source threats. Now, I had a reason for putting this in. This is from linuxsecurity.com. The government's warning to the health sector to watch for open source threats has long been on the radar of the IT industry. Open source software, which is free to use, can be a great tool for organizations that need to scale quickly or don't have the budget for proprietary software. However, using it has inherent risks, and no one knows that better than the government. The government says that open source security vulnerabilities can allow hackers access to systems and networks and cause damage that could cost millions of dollars in damages in low data or productivity. They also say that hackers could use these vulnerabilities as entry points into other parts of an organization's network or infrastructure. The government is trying to help by offering guidance on how to migrate these risks or mitigate these risks and what steps should be taken if you suspect an open source vulnerability may have compromised your system. Healthcare organizations should be aware of these issues when choosing software solutions and ensure they have proper security measures before implementing them into their systems. If this advice is followed, choosing open source software solutions over proprietary alternatives can have significant security benefits. Check out the article linked below for more details on the government's warning and advice for mitigating risk. And the link is below that particular paragraph in the article. Okay, so now I when I first read this, I was a little bit triggered because it's the same old thing that proprietary software advocates try to shove down everybody's throats, that if it's open source, how on earth can it be secure? Because anybody has access to the source code, right? And
Yeah, but also everybody has access to audit the
yeah,
source code.
it's kind of hard to hide something in open source software if people are making it their life's mission, and they do, to try to find these, little 0 days. And oh, by the way, there's fundamentally no difference between software that is written and
Well,
collaborated on.
there is a difference between open source and closed source. I mean, closed source has security through obscurity, and
Obscurity meaning that you don't
open,
know your security has been compromised because
right,
you can't see the code.
open source has security through all eyes on it to see where
Right.
you're messing up so that it can be fixed. But that's just our opinion.
I think the argument here, if I was to give them any latitude whatsoever, the argument here is that you have a higher probability of effective um, threats simply because an attacker has access to the source code, so they can audit this code and find where possible vulnerabilities might be. And I can accept that argument to a degree. But again, with all software, there's best
Yeah.
practices, there's ways of using it
There's
correctly. Make sure you keep it up to date, things like that. Um,
there's a risk with open source. There was that 2-year old
yeah,
vulnerability that we just read about a second ago. There's a risk with closed source. We've all read about all the different things that has happened with like Windows and things like that. But the back end of nearly everything runs on open source. So
absolutely. I mean, you would be shocked to learn how much of this world's
I wouldn't be.
telecommunication and medical and
Banking,
banking, shopping, all this stuff is ran by these little open source projects that are all just Lego blocks in the whole building process, and
Linux runs the world.
it does. It absolutely
The
does.
back end. Not the front end, but the back end.
Which is not so glorious, but when it stops working, then everybody wants to know why, and so there you go. So that was the reason why I thought it'd be interesting to include this article. I mean, it's possible that the author did not want to put the message out there that open source software is vulnerable just because it's open source. I think they could have done a little bit better job in
Well, now,
describing.
open source software, you could consider it to be vulnerable because it is open source. It's just closed source is equally as vulnerable, just for different reasons.
Yeah, and the glaring difference is that if you got a vulnerability in closed source software, you're not going to know it, uh, because
Unless
you.
someone else finds it and puts it
Yeah,
out there for you. Because, Windows isn't going to tell you that they're vulnerable.
no,
Microsoft isn't going to tell you that there's a vulnerability in Windows. Let me
not
rephrase
a
that.
chance. So, if nothing else, that's it for security and privacy. Moving on to the biweekly wanderings, and I'll go first. So this week I decided to focus on two things: setting up a Mumble server for mintCast and getting better at LibreOffice Writer. The second of those things is important to me because, as many would be aware, about a year or so ago, we moved our cloud stuff to Nextcloud, effectively ending our dependence on Google Drive and Docs. While everyone has been resolved to this decision, it has not been the easiest of rides. Nextcloud has a couple of options for document creation and management, with one of which being the best supported. An open source group called Collabora, in partnership with the Document Foundation, offer a solution called Nextcloud Office. This solution involves both the Nextcloud client plugin, which is basically a web version of LibreOffice, and the server component, which is called Collabora, which has to be installed separately from the Nextcloud installation. It's essentially a document management server. It doesn't do any actual storage of the individual documents. Rather, it is simply the engine of the document management solution that we use. While LibreOffice is one of those darling open source software projects that we are lucky exists, its functionality is somewhat different from Microsoft Office and bears even less resemblance to Google Docs. Anyone expecting it to behave like either of those projects is in for a bit of a bumpy ride. The biggest challenge was learning how to properly manage the way LibreOffice uh, handles paragraph styles. This feature is actually powerful because it allows you to create profiles which control everything from the font style and color to paragraph indentation and bullet style. Uh, our show notes doc utilizes a lot of indentation and bulleting, and the way it's handled on LibreOffice has turned out to be a bit of a maddening process for some people not used to the way it's done. I set out through several tutorials and videos to learn how to do it correctly so that I'm not railroaded by the nuances of the software. And I'm glad I did because there's a lot of differences out there, or there's a lot of differences between the software. Now, I had to take, when I was in college, I took a course on Microsoft Office. It was required for pretty much every degree. They called the class Introduction to Microcomputers. I'm not sure what that's all about, but it was absolutely a course on Microsoft Office. And so you get broken by learning how to use that, and then you try to go to something that is uh, equally massive in terms of its uh, functionality, and it doesn't behave the same way. It looks the same way in a lot of places, but it doesn't necessarily behave the same way. So it's like learning how to do it all over again, and it's a bit painful. So anyway, I was able to find some stuff on that, and I'm still kind of honing out some stuff, but I'm learning a lot. The other challenge I took on is learn how to set up and manage a Mumble server as a possible solution to the ongoing problems we have with video streaming on or to YouTube. For over a year now, we've been using a solution called Video Ninja, which is a project I love dearly. My other two shows get on with the software flawlessly, but the whole thing has been slightly less successful for the mintCast crew. So I took it upon myself to find another solution. Now, my thought was that if video is the bottleneck, then perhaps we should just drop video altogether and simply focus on the audio version of the show. Um, Mumble would mean bandwidth necessary for the host to stream would be a lot less, and software resources would be lower as well. So I got the server up and running, and it's currently public facing for testing purposes. It seems to work well. Now, yesterday during our meeting, it was decided that video was, well, it's a little more valuable. It's a bit more of a valuable tool for interfacing with each other. So another solution was needed. This was when Jitsi Meet was suggested. I think it was by Eric, actually. I was aware of the software, and I think I liked the service. When I first started Three Fat Truckers, it was the solution we went with. In time, I moved away from it in favor of Video Ninja, which is a project made more for content creation and ties in neatly with OBS Studio. It actually streams directly to OBS Studio. That's what we're using right now. Um, that was because at the time I could have sworn there was a time limit on their server, which would be a non-starter for mintCast because we tend to go on for 3 hours or better at times. Whether that was true or not at the time, there's absolutely no indication that limitation exists now. The software seems solid and a great possible solution for the show. We will do some testing of these solutions before we decide to make any real changes. For now, we'll muddle on with Video Ninja. Right now, I want to say Roundtable should probably always be done with Discord to allow community members to participate in the conversation. And let me take this opportunity to say, when it comes to Roundtable, we encourage all of our listeners to jump on our Discord channel and join us for Roundtable every Saturday opposite of the mintCast live stream. at 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Now, what that means is it wouldn't have been yesterday. It'll be this next coming Saturday at 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern. So the weekend's opposite of the actual show, or opposite of the weeks where it shows up on YouTube, I should say. So anybody, and I mean anybody and everybody that is welcome, more than welcome. We're excited to get new people to come on and talk with us about just anything that comes up. So yeah, go if you haven't got Discord set up or installed, it might be a good time to give that a try. It's proprietary, but it's actually a pretty amazing piece of software, and it's free, and it works really well. And there's a version for every platform out there. So add the mintCast channel, and you'll be off to the races. Anyway, that's all I got. What about you, Joe?
I would like to say that I've done a lot, but I took some relaxing time. But I did do some. I found a Parrot mini drone at the Goodwill for $8. It's not a great drone to begin with, but for the price, you can't really complain. In the end, it's going to be my son's to play with, but for now, I'm messing about with it. There was some issues with it staying connected to Bluetooth, but that seems to be a common problem with this particular model of drone. It's what is it, the Parrot Mini Mars. This disconnect caused the drone to fly up and hit my ceiling in the garage, which caused one of the propellers to fly off into the ninth dimension. Have not been able to find it yet. This led me to try to 3D print another one to try out. I actually printed a couple of different ones, but I did not find one that worked very well, so I'll probably just end up purchasing some more soon. Plus, I'm thinking that some extra batteries might be helpful because it takes a little while to charge, and then the batteries may be 15 to 20 minutes of running. Very small batteries, though, so I'm not surprised. The controls for the drone are actually pretty good when the thing is working, as it should, but it hovers very well and moves around pretty good, but will always be limited by how far you can control it using Bluetooth. And I have read a lot of people reviews talking about how they were playing with it in their backyard and Bluetooth would disconnect and the thing would fly straight up, which seems to be a pretty major problem that they didn't, set it up in software that if Bluetooth disconnected, that it lands instead of, flying away, never to be seen again. So for now, I will probably stick to me and my son flying it around my garage so it doesn't end up on the moon. Now, I also 3D printed some cat ears for my children's headphones. During this process, I found out that my bed on my 3D printer had a lot of wobble. It was actually a pretty easy fix once I watched the YouTube videos that showed me how to fix it. My kids like the cat ears. I did have to print a couple of different iterations of the ears to get a proper fit on their headphones, and I did have to redesign the mounting portion. I may still get some issues with durability, as like my son already broke his first set, but that might be caused by some other problems. And I may have to add some material in strategic locations to get them to hold together better, but only time will tell. I was also trying to use up some of my older rolls of PLA to get rid of them after running them through my filament dryer, but I guess I used too high of a setting on my dryer because a couple of rolls got closer to the center. The filament started kind of sticking together. This caused it not to stay on the spool roller that I have for it. Mostly the prints came out okay, but the roll would just like be all over the place and fly towards the not the extruder, but I guess that it's still part of the extruder. But I'm hoping that the Titan bed will mean that I don't have to level the bed as often. Although I am getting a bit of level shift, it's not really that bad. I'm looking into what could be causing it, but it might be that the filament roll was pulling against the extruder. So we'll see after I get a new roll. Now, I'm also pretty far along in the process of designing and printing my own headband for headphones. Still some bugs for me to work out on the length and how I want it to fold and whether or not I want the lengths to be adjustable, as I'm going to be the only one wearing the ones that I make. Now, this will allow me to extend the life of over the ear headphones when the bands break by simply redesigning the forks that hold them into position. Right now, I am designing around the Hesh 3 as I have quite a few of them with broken bands floating around. And I also have the STLs that I previously made for the forks. So that's a little bit more design that I don't have to do right now. I also have some ideas that'll make the printing process easier, as right now there is a lot of support material that has to be removed, and the end product isn't as smooth as I would like it to be. Um, Also, I'm thinking about changing the design a little bit and adding some JST connectors, which would make the device much more modular so that I only have to remove the forks and replace it with other ones as needed, depending on the headphones that I want to use. This will mean that I don't have to print as many bands, and I can do a lot more testing and each iteration of forks pop on, pop off without having to do a whole bunch of soldering. I've also started the process of backing up my home drive on my server/garage computer in order to do the migration to an M.2 SSD from my 2.5 SSD. I know I could do a DD and then do an expansion on the file system, but the issue with that is that there's a lot of cruft that has built up over the years. Um, so I am testing out different ways of backing up as well. But I'll still be able to switch back to the old drive if I need to. So, ultimate backup there. I have a lot of years in getting this OS set up the way that I want, so I'm a little reluctant to pull that final trigger on a nuke and pave, but it probably needs to be done just to clear that cruft up from testing various applications and various settings. Plus, the added space could be useful. I'd be going from a 500 gig to a 1 terabyte. I tend to try and not put personal files on the main disk of any system that I use, but it tends to happen anyway as time goes on. I'll let you know how the process goes. I am testing out the built-in backup functions from Mint. Um, so I think it just does a straight copy of the /home, which I also did manually. And then also with Mint comes the ability to create a list of all the repos that you're using, along with all the applications that you have installed. I'm testing that out as well, but for some reason, it only gives you the option to store that in the home directory. So I'm going to make sure that I have a separate copy of the file that it creates in another location that I can then import after I install the new version of Mint. And yeah.
Backup is one of those things where there's like all these different methods for accomplishing it, and it's not always clear which one is best for you. You know, the Mint tool that comes with the distro is actually a pretty good tool. It handles regular backups using rsync, and then it also speaks Btrfs. So I assume it does like a Btrfs send receive or something like that. And then that's one of those things that just go you put it off and you put it off and you put it off. And I've actually, unfortunately, I've gotten to the point with my servers where they've been up and running so well for so long now that I've forgotten how a lot of the stuff was set up on them, and because I put so much automation in place, so if I had to go and rebuild it now, it would probably be quite an enterprise.
Yeah,
So
but that's not the only thing when it comes to backups either, because you can say you backed up, but if you've never tested your restore process,
yeah,
then you cannot be certain that you can come back from something devastating.
and I listen to Two and a Half Admins a lot, and they talk about these really powerful backup processes they use that provides basically, oh, they've got basically this real quick path to just mount the backup and then boot from it, and everything is just flawless, and then that backup becomes the root, and then
So
you back
they
up from there.
what they do is they create a backup image. They
Yeah,
entirely back up their entire drive, like using a DD or something to that effect.
I think in their case they're big on ZFS, so I'm sure. Um,
Whatever imaging
oh, there's
technique
this
they uses.
project out there called uh, not Nagios, but there's another one with a name like that, um, that's built just for like ZFS and things that can handle all the backup, creates the images. Fantastic tool, and I feel real stupid for. I bet people are screaming into their speakers right now. But it's a tool that one of the hosts on that show actually created, um, for creating backups, managing the backup process and everything. And I don't know if it works on anything besides ZFS or ZFS, but it's like I've said before, if you don't have a backup, you don't own it. And for that matter, but there again, not everybody has terabytes of storage at their disposal. I mean,
Well, I don't
storage
back
is,
up. I don't back up a lot of my operating systems, but I know I can rebuild them at the drop of a hat, and I store
yeah.
all the data that I care about separately. So,
For me, like the Jellyfin server, I mean that's a considerable amount of data on there, and so I've got a cold storage solution that I use the ZFS replication tools about once a month. I'll just back it up onto that thing, and then, like we said before, you got to be able to test your backups. So, which is easy in that case because I can just hook that up and then see if the files play on it, because it's just media. Um, and then the next cloud is backed up onto this machine with the Nextcloud desktop client, which I got directly from. I found the best way to get that tool is directly from the website, the app image.
thank you for reminding me because backing up my home doesn't necessarily back up my root cron and does not back up my FS tab.
Yeah. Now the FS tab, that's an interesting one because what I tend to do on that is do a git pull or a git push, and I send that up to my GitHub account because it's a text file, and that's a good place to have it. It'll be good to go right there for a long period of time. So that I need because I've got, like, this machine, for example. I've got uh, the second hard drive is like a ButterFS storage pool, and I've got it mounted with a bunch of sub volumes, and then there's, oh, I can never remember the right mount options every time. So it's a good idea to have a backup of your FS table just to be able to just copy and
Well,
paste that and get everything in.
if I'm backing up all my settings for like Plex or my Plex and things like that, then I need all of those drives to be mounted in the same locations when I boot up a new system.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely good for me to have the FS tab backed up as well.
I don't necessarily need it right at first boot. See, because what I've got is that second drive in this machine is just ButterFS, because you can write ButterFS without a table. It can be right there on the root of the device, and then the sub volumes are kind of your arbitrary, I don't know, partition scheme. It's not the same thing, but it can be. The machine can kind of interpret it that way. I don't necessarily need that to be um, there at boot, because what I'll then do is create a directory in my home directory and name it production. And then once I get that backed up FS table, uh, on the machine and then reboot. Then it mounts that second drive into slash home slash me slash production. And then I've got all my, that's actually the drive that I use for storing all these audio files and recordings and the working directory for Audacity and whatnot. Um, what I used to do, and what used to be kind of the common thing to do back in the day, was to just basically mount your whole home directory onto a second hard drive. But then what I found was you get some performance degradation involved in that because that second hard drive is almost always the slower hard drive.
Right, because you
And
put your root system onto, your SSD or your
yeah,
M.2, and then you put your home onto a spinning disk or whatever's handy,
right.
or even a USB stick. I've seen that for security purposes where you can just turn around and walk away with that.
But
But yeah, it is going to take a degradation hit because you are, reading from a second source.
your dot configs, all your dot files, which any and all, even the desktop itself is going to be sourcing the configs from that home directory. So I would
And that's the
say,
other thing. That's the other thing that you have to worry about is, yeah, you have all your configs there, but then you have to install the applications again. Otherwise, those configs are doing absolutely nothing.
yeah, and that can get cluttered. It can get, I don't know. It's good practice to clean that up as often as you can. I'm thankful for like Firefox having a sort of profile tool or backup mechanism to where everything that's on Firefox is backed up. The same's true with Chromium and Chrome, in any browser for that matter.
Um, uh, I'm also pretty sure that my graphics card is dying because I'm getting a lot of visual artifacts on Chrome, and it's the only machine that I'm getting it on. And I'm also having some problems with certain video file playback with Plex, even like locally if I'm doing it with Plex. But I'm not getting it when I play the file directly. So it's a transcoding issue, but Plex uses the graphics card to do the transcoding. So
Jellyfin does too. If you pass the there's an access thing you've got to do in the Docker uh, compose where you give it access to the hardware, and then it's like on this machine, for example, it's using QuickSync off of the SoC to do the transcoding, and that seems to work really well. Um,
yeah, well, it's good to give it access to the graphics card
yeah,
to be able to do the transcoding, unless of course your graphics card is dying. But it
yeah.
is a really old graphics. It's a Radeon 570, I think. So it's a
So
little bit
I've
older.
I've got a Fire Pro. Well, I've got a Radeon Pro in this thing now, and it just screams. I've got a Fire Pro 7100 laying over there and a 5100. So the 7100 is considerably more money, but if you want that 5100, I can send that to you.
Just mail it to me. Yeah, I'll definitely swap it. Well, I'm also supposed to be getting some Micro Center gift cards, but
Oh my.
uh, I don't know. Considering how expensive graphics cards still are at Micro Center, it might be better for you just to mail me one.
Yeah, I'll send you that 5100 because that's still a
Okay.
fairly decent.
Well, my 570 has been doing great for what I use it for. It's just, dying.
Yep, as they tend to do, because those suckers get hot sometimes, depending on what you're using them for.
And I am in Texas.
There's that. So, um, yeah, duplicating and backing up is, gosh, there's other tools out there like, what was the one that used to be really popular that came with Ubuntu? Maybe it still does. Was it just called Backup, or it had a funny name, didn't it? It looked like a safe, the icon to it.
I was trying to remember the name of it the other day, but I haven't been able to. So
Yeah, it was just a simple backup tool where you told it back up this and put it over here, and it basically just either used an R clone backend or a DD backend or whatever. But it was the simpler the better, and it's even better if you can create like a uh, either an archive or like a single image file, and then keep those on a larger drive, or even if you could compress them somehow. Um, yeah, I've gotten to the point now where if I don't do something soon, I'm going to completely forget how these things were built. So yeah, backing up is just an
Oh,
invaluable
for
thing.
you, a DD backup might be worth it. But like I said, I'm trying to get rid of some of the cruft that I
Yep.
have. So
And I need to do some learning on how to back up Docker images because, as most people
copy and
do,
paste.
basically, yeah, it's not clear. Those persistent Docker directories are they're saved with like the file name is like a hash or something like that, so it's not always clear what
Well,
is what.
with the with Docker, I mean, you don't get image updates unless you wipe out and restore.
Right.
So then the only thing you have to worry about backing up is the mounts that you provide to Docker. So for the external information that is, significant to you as opposed to um, significant to the Docker image, because you're always going to be able to do a fresh pull on the Docker image. Even if you want to go back a version, I think there's still a way to do that. You just have to specify the version you want to pull.
Yeah.
So,
They call it a tag. You can, like, all of my containers have the name of the image, and then there's a colon, and then the tag. Which, if you tell it latest tag, it'll always go and fetch the latest image when it
right,
does
which is
that.
how people update. And so
Yeah.
long as they keep the right mount points, then the data that they're using is correct. Which is what I used to do when I used Docker all the time instead of
Now Docker's got two persistent uh, storage options. You've got the option where you tell it, okay, I need you to make such and such directory in the Docker image persistent, meaning it doesn't get fried when you uh, power down the container and then because most everything, unless you tell it otherwise, most everything on a Docker container is ephemeral. It gets erased and then rebuilt unless you tell it this directory I need to be persistent. In which case, it kind of gets saved within the Docker system as a Docker volume, which is kind of saved in kind of a secret place, and then it's given a hash for a name and all that. It's not really meant to be accessed by any other means except for Docker. Your other option is to literally bind mount a directory outside of Docker into the Docker container, which means anything Docker does will get saved in that directory outside the container. And then it's persistent for that reason, which,
which is really the only way to handle a lot of your configs
right.
or the access that like the Plex Docker would have.
And if you wanted to install something, sometimes you'll run into a situation where you want to install something on the container. Like if you was getting in that container, if you was shelling into the container a lot and you needed to have nano, because if you find that when you get in there and you go looking for nano, it's not there, so you install it and then you do whatever work in the shell for that container, and then you restart the container and nano is gone, and it's because the
Or
.usr.
you man up and learn Vim.
Well, that's not there by default either. I mean,
Not all.
it loses anything that gets installed other than what is built into the container.
And it also
Now,
loses updates. Trust me, I tried. But
yeah,
yeah,
it you can't because those updates are not part of
image.
the Docker build. So if you go outside of what was originally developed on that container, the next time it goes down and starts back up, unless you do something crazy like make your .usr and .lib directories persistent, then it has no choice. But then you're going to screw it up for other reasons. So Docker's just one of those things you kind of have to take it the way it is in most cases, unless you. Well, the other option you have is to get a hold of the Docker file and change things on that. That way, when it gets built against that. But you
Yeah,
know,
I used to have some interesting problems where one Docker image would get updated and another one wouldn't be updated as often, such as using one of the Docker images for a VPN and having the network functionality passed from one Docker image to another Docker image, and then the Docker image of the application that I was using would get an update, and then it would no longer work properly with the VPN network. So,
maddening. The
but I was also, definitely not using that the way that it was meant to be used either.
Yeah, that's the thing about that. If you go outside of their ways of doing things, one thing's sure, you don't want to use any automation because a tool like Watchtower, which in itself is a Docker container, you fire that up and it literally just keeps your containers up to date and shuts them down, updates the image, starts it back up. That's automation that I need because I'm on the road all week and I need these things kept up to date. Otherwise, I'll be every weekend when I'd come home, I'd be maddeningly updating all this stuff. Normally, it's painless and it works really well. Every once in a great while, you'll run
Something
into
breaks.
this. Well, yeah, you run into this strange malignment where, for example, all of our websites, everything from mintcast.org to linuxotc.org, 3fattruckers.org, and a couple others are all running on Docker containers on one machine, and they're all dependent on a separate MariaDB container. Now, officially, when you get the Docker container for WordPress, it's set up for like an older version of MySQL. And since I know better than they do, I changed that to the latest version of MariaDB because I just wanted MariaDB. And every once in a great while, you'll get this weird malignment with that because it's maybe the one thing gets updated, but the other thing doesn't, or one thing's expecting a feature that is not there, or whatever. But in the year and a half I've had that running that way, well, maybe not quite that long, about a year, I've been running it on Docker. It's been, for the most part, flawless. I've not heard any complaints about the websites whatsoever.
Well, a couple of times we've had issues with links pointing internally instead of externally.
Yeah, and that'll happen if you build a WordPress and then you spin it up by addressing its internal IP address, and then you go into all the WordPress options, and it like assigns that internal IP address to all of the links, and then when you do get it converted over to the host name of the website, it doesn't get everything switched back over. So you find these things a little at a time. I think that one that Londoner found some months back had been sitting there like that for 2 or 3 months that I'm aware of. Just addressed linked to my internal IP address when it shouldn't have been. So WordPress tries to go through and change everything when you get your host name resolved to that server, but it doesn't get everything, and it's almost impossible to catch all of it too because there's permalinks all over the place in a website like ours. Mintcast.org is actually a pretty big website in terms of how much stuff is on it that's built up over the years just because of how long the show has been around. But Docker has proven to be pretty reliable for that. I have to say. I mean, It's a real
Like,
good
see, all you
solution.
guys started moving to Docker when I started moving away from Docker.
It
Now, I
was
like Docker, and it is a good solution, but it did have its update problems. And then I found that running things bare bones was a little bit quicker, and yeah, it takes a little bit more work on my part, but not by much. So
not really. And our next cloud is actually installed bare metal, and it's turned out to be fine that way because I'm actually able to get in there and make configurations a lot easier and get it updated a lot easier. Whereas with Docker, you're kind of at the mercy of Docker with these
yeah,
things.
are the
It,
individuals that are packaging it.
yeah, I mean there is that. You're kind of at the same mercy. It's like you're placing a lot more trust in a developer by using Docker because it's not just their package that they're giving you. They're giving you just enough operating system minus the kernel to make that thing run, you know. So
And the
you
changes that you make are not persistent unless you mount the configs separately.
yeah, which in most cases is handled by using a Docker Compose. That way, all of that stuff it's not persistent in terms of the file system, but it's persistent in terms of it's in the recipe for the image to build into the container, you know, which
It's
in
your
my
own
case,
personal Docker Compose.
yeah, correct.
So
And sometimes that's a matter of going to the community because people are out there sharing Docker Compose files, you know, like, well, this is what I use to get this thing working and it seems to work better. Or if you're wanting to add things, you know, there's actually a lot of creativity involved, I think, in putting all these options in a Docker Compose to make it do things you want it to do.
yeah, I still have all my old Docker commands with all the different setups for the different, with listings for the different machines in my notes that I have sitting around. So that way I can still set things up. And, you know, it literally was, as long as I was on the correct machine, a matter of copy and paste, or take that command and modify it for a new machine and then copy and paste. I never used Docker Compose, but from what I understand, it kind of works the exact same way, except, you know, you're executing it instead of copying and pasting.
Right. It's just that when you use a Docker Compose, it's a YAML file, so there's that little bit of weirdness involved too. And but yeah, in my case, it was kind of necessary because if you're going to run a bunch of websites on one machine, you really you're really either limited to creating a bunch of virtual servers and then installing it in bare metal, and then you have to use all these strange uh, port numbers for each, and then you have to probably end up having to either do
Well, with Docker, you still have to do the exact same thing. You still
you
got to
do,
forward
but
the right ports.
you're binding it if you put it behind a see all this stuff is also behind a reverse proxy, which lets every single one of these Docker images think it's the only thing running because it's behind that proxy, and that proxy is taking that traffic and sending it directly to that container. So the containers really don't have a marvelous idea of each other because the reverse proxy is handling that. And that's the other little piece of magic behind all this is that you could still do all the TLS and the SL the Let's Encrypt stuff, and that's all handled automatically by the Nginx reverse proxy manager. And then all that traffic comes in on port 80 and 443, and then it's like sent to the individual port of the container, which you can make that anything. Um, as far as Let's Encrypt is concerned, though, it looks like it's when they go to get the certificate, it looks like it's on port 443, when in actuality it might be on port 4043 or something like that internally. But that's the beauty of the reverse proxy is it just lets everything run and think that it's the only thing running. And I've not run into any limitations as far as that goes. That's the other thing kind of surprised me too, because each one of these websites has got its own database container, and recently I set up Redis object storage or object memory backends for them, and that's also separate containers. And each one of these websites has got its own separate MariaDB and Redis, and it does not add measurable resource intensity to the system at all. You would think it'd be kind of like running all of these things, times four or times five. And in terms of memory usage, it actually runs really, really efficiently. It's kind of hard to imagine that it would run any better than that if it was all bare metal. Because if it was bare metal, if I was doing all these bare metal and then, I don't know, putting Cloudflare in front of all these websites and using esoteric port numbers and things like that, then I would have that would have one database installation that would have separate tables for each one of these websites. And if, like, for example, MariaDB went down, it would take down all of those websites at one time because it's only one installation of MariaDB, which the way it's set up now is each one of these websites has got its own container. So if one website goes down, it doesn't take the rest of them down with it. So, I mean, that's the advantage. And it's been doggone reliable, I think. I think all the little paper cut stuff on our website's been worked out over time. It seems to be good. So backing up of all that stuff is something I need to work on though, because admittedly, it's not been it's not been all that great. Like I said, I mostly just back up the data that's on it, which I feel like I feel like it's enough because beyond that, it's really just reinstalling Nextcloud and like repopulating the data on the drive is it's a pain in the butt, but it would be doable. I can't speak to like everybody's personal data that they've put on, if they have put anything personal in the Nextcloud. If anybody does, they really need to be doing their own backup solution for that. Um,
I think I have one file on your Nextcloud.
I know you got a resume on there that you put in the mintCast. Uh,
Yeah, I put it into the wrong Nextcloud, but yeah, another
but well, I
backup for
mean,
me.
it's taking up no space whatsoever.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it and if anybody needed more space, I would give it to them. I just got 1 gigabyte set up for default. That way, if 20 people are using it, it's not going to get filled up that quick. But I mean, it's going to, at the rate we're going, it's going to take years to fill that thing up. And by that time, I probably will have upgraded to bigger hard drives anyway. Because that's the other thing, hard drives don't last forever, no matter how much money you
well, they
spend on
don't.
them. You know,
SSDs last a little bit longer than spinning disk, but things can still happen to SSDs,
they
and
absolutely can.
eventually they all break. So enjoy them while you got them.
Yeah, especially the cheaper ones. I mean, you can buy SSDs now for just,
$20.
I mean, insanely cheap for some of these things. I think I bought a couple of Silicon Power SSDs for, I got a 500 gig, and I don't think I paid 20 some bucks for that thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And and it,
But it's great for quick fixes on people's laptops,
yep,
and
gets
you
them back up
know,
and running.
yeah,
The Crucials, they're pretty cheap too. Um, Now for my systems, I tend to go for the Samsungs. For like this one's got a two
and they are
terabyte.
fast. Well, even those cheap SSDs, the $20 500 gigs or whatever. I mean, they're still faster than a spinning disk. They're
Oh,
not as fast.
big time.
It's like the Evos or whatever, or the M.2s, but still, they work. And I've had some that have lasted for, several years now, so I can't complain about the price performance.
I've paid a little bit of money on the storage for these machines. These,
Well, no matter how you cut it, if you're getting a 12 terabyte hard drive, it's going to cost you money.
oh, I'm not
So
even talking about those. Yeah,
I,
those
I've
were.
I've spent money on
Oh
storage
yeah,
because I have 12 terabyte drives and 8 terabyte drives, and
uh,
the 8 terabyte drives are probably getting older. But it's my 4 terabyte drives that died. I still have some 2 terabyte drives that have lasted like 12 years. I mean, it's insane how long those 2 terabyte drives have lasted me. But I've also upgraded several times since then.
yeah. Three of those, 12 terabyte Iron Wolf drives for that Jellyfin server. That's that's about $1,100 worth of storage right there. Because those are
I
pretty
don't.
heavy duty
Yeah,
drives.
the Iron Wolf drives are expensive. I usually don't buy that expensive of a drive. I usually spend about 120, $130 for a
Yeah,
12 terabyte drive.
it might not have been necessary to spend, but they were made for the NAS work cases, so I
Yeah,
went with that. And they're not shingled. They're highly recommended by the guys on 2.5 admins. Not that that was the main reason why I bought them. It just seemed like the best specs. If I was going to do it, I wanted to do it once. Then the Nextcloud server, I got.
Bill's secretly a Bitcoin billionaire and doesn't want to tell anybody.
I've spent so much money on this stuff. I've spent the kind of money other people spend on their cars.
Right?
Um, but the 2 terabyte drives that are in
Oh,
the uh,
let's not even talk about the price of cars these days. My God.
I was looking at a, what was it? Oh, it was a Ford Explorer.
No, before you get into that, my wife sent me an article on this guy that bought an electric vehicle for $16,000. I think it was a used vehicle that he did buy for $16,000, and it was only like 2, 3, 4 years old. And then he found out that the battery was only at like 60 or 70% efficiency, and so it was time to replace the battery. And he went to the company to find out how much it would be for a battery, and it was going to be $18,000 for the battery and two thousand
I
dollars for
think
the
I saw this
installation.
article. Yeah,
That is bug nuts, man. You didn't pay that much for the car, but you got to pay that much for the battery. Okay, no, you were talking. I'm
I
sorry.
I'm seeing sticker prices on things like Ford Explorers upwards of $80,000 now, and that is just not. But the only reason these things exist is because knuckleheads are going out there and paying for it and taking out 6 and 7 year loans on vehicles now, and it's just insane.
The idea of paying $30,000 for a vehicle kind
Uh,
of drives me nuts. And then that's like your cheap cars now are the
right.
$30,000 if you're looking to buy new, and like 45 for moderately spec vehicles, and then upwards from there. And that's just insane to me.
Yeah,
I
I agree. And the e-vehicle thing is not, that's not the answer either. I think I got a bad feeling
well,
about that.
I've mentioned before my whole perceptions on the e-vehicles until we get the proper infrastructure for that, and
Right.
until we get a proper way of getting power to those vehicles that isn't a coal burning facility as it is, then it's kind of pointless to say that this is an environmental improvement getting a electric vehicle if the power to your house that's powering your electric vehicle is all coming from non-clean sources anyway.
And that's not to mention the geopolitical impact on these third world countries where a lot of these rare earth materials are coming
Right.
from.
Right.
And
Well, that has a lot to do with like solar panels as well, because all the stuff that goes into making solar panels has to get dug out of the ground
right.
somewhere, and that's usually a very dirty process. Plus, if you look at the trucking industry, cough cough, Bill, cough cough,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
can't really make a 10-ton truck and 10-ton trailer that
Oh, 40 ton.
efficiently work. Okay, I was going at the low end here, but yeah, 40-ton truck and trailer that efficiently uses electric power. Maybe hybrid, maybe, but electric, no. You would spend more time charging than you would moving.
And we do the truck shows with Three Fat Truckers, and we go walking around, and no serious people are even considering electric vehicle, electric full on semi trucks. It's just not it's not feasible. I really think I can't remember who said it, but they said it best when they said e-vehicles did not come along to save the ecosystem, the environment. They come along to save the auto industry that was struggling for a save face kind of half baked solution to the world kind of shifting towards a more environmentally conscious way of doing things. And
And maybe we do have to go through this period where it's
yeah,
not a clean solution to switch to electric, but we have to go through these different iterations of terrible vehicles
yeah, and I tend to,
before we can come to a proper solution.
that's kind of what I was thinking. It's just one of those things we got to get through, and then somehow during the process of trying to make that work, we stumble on something that is meaningful, like hydrogen or something along those lines, which,
It's hard to store enough hydrogen to make that efficient as well. But yeah, I get what you're saying there. The only byproduct of a hydrogen engine is,
water.
water.
And the moment that comes online, the e-vehicles are finished. I mean, and there are serious people working on that.
Yeah, but it's the
So,
storing of hydrogen that's an issue.
yeah,
It's also you can't really put enough of hydrogen into a vehicle to make it perform with any type of efficiency as well. But yeah, I mean, growing pains.
yep, that's true.
Maybe the electric vehicle will be the solution, but there's going to be a whole lot of changes that have to happen before it's actually a viable solution.
Yeah.
I have seen where Biden was endorsing rail travel, like for individuals, which could then reduce overall emissions. And if we had a more viable rail system for shipping, which seems like rather difficult when you're talking town to town, so I don't know. Maybe it could reduce in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, at least we're in the beginning, if nothing else, of a better consciousness towards these things. Uh,
A reduction of resilience on or reliance on fossil fuels.
a finite resource
Right.
that as much as people are convincing themselves that it is big enough to get by for the foreseeable future, it's not big enough to get by forever. We're definitely burning it off faster than it's being
Being made.
yeah,
And not only that, but people are going to complain the costs are going up, the costs are going up, the costs are going up on gas. But you know what? That supply and demand, there's more demand for it. There's a reducing supply of it. What are you supposed to do here? It's the cost is just going to go up.
it is. As long as people are willing to pay $5, they'll try to charge you 6, and if you pay 6, eventually it's going to go up to 7. And
Well, the U.S. usually pays per gallon a lot less than most other places do due to government subsidies. But anything over $1 and people start crying.
Oh yeah.
Not that they don't pay it, but
Now, when I was in Germany in the early 90s, and I mean like 92, um, they were rationing fuel to us. The register when you would go get a car plated, you had to get it inspected over there, which yeah. And then the
here in Texas, you
registration,
do.
yeah. There used to be a lot more states that did it, but anymore, I guess I don't know. Maybe they found that not enough people could pass. So, but we were paying, I think in those days, on average, about 89 cents a gallon for gas, and the Germans, I want to say they were at about 4 mark 50 a liter, which you're looking
Yeah,
at way
when I was
over $5 and $6 a gallon in the
when I was
early
in
90s.
Korea, yeah, when I was in Korea in 99, 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. But the gas prices were like $2 a liter, which means, like $8 a
Yeah.
gallon. So, yeah.
I mean, that's these countries like that. That's why you see so many more people riding bicycles or
Or why their vehicles are extremely tiny, or
mhm.
why they're driving mopeds. I mean, their trucks look like Tonka toys, but yeah.
I could just imagine the cost of trucking in Europe. Um, the trucks are different for a lot of reasons over there. They anything that's 200 years old here in America is about 1100 years old in Europe, and as such, there's less room to get around. So most things have to be unloaded from the street. So the trucks are a little bit more accommodating for a bit of a different.
There's
Uh,
also, well, I know last year there was a lot of news coming out of Europe about the truckers either striking or there not being enough truckers because truckers simply weren't able to make money due to the costs and the regulations involved. So, yeah.
we're seeing a lot of that here in the states too. My company is down about 15 drivers. Not even Walmart is starting people off at six figures, and they can't keep drivers.
Well, in
And
the early aughts, I remember that there was a large problem in the trucking industry when prices first started spiking with diesel, and truckers were paying for their own gas, and they were actually in the negatives a lot of time because of how the price spike in diesel went, and the fact that the payments from companies weren't matching. So,
And a lot of times, yeah, because the companies want the drivers to fuel. Like sometimes, I guess I've never actually had a job that did this, but some companies they dispatch you your run where you'll pick it up here, and then they tell you to fuel here, 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 and here because the companies they're big enough and branched out enough to where they've got deals going on with all these different truck stop chains and these fuel distributors and all that. And drivers will go to the places they want to go to sometimes. And then they turn in the paperwork for that, and the company doesn't pay for the fuel. Now that's only true for owner operators. If you're a company driver, you we carry a card around with us, and we just I can fuel wherever I want, and I just pay with that card. And then,
Kevin in a big rig.
yep, that was an interesting. That was interesting. I For those that are unaware, I don't know what, like a year ago, Joe turned me on to this YouTube series where
From
the
Reddit.
yeah the guy was reading from Reddit this story of a fairly new trucker and his experience with a team oriented company, which I don't know why anybody in their right mind would go do something like that, but this guy was having shall we say, interesting experience with the co-driver that he was assigned to be with. Now, you'll have teams in the trucking industry because a lot of times, like for example, freight that comes out of California, like produce and things like that, needs to be shipped back across the country within 36 hours because it's produce. It's things that will it's literally losing life as it sits in the trailer. So it's got to hurry up and get across. we drivers are limited to 11 hours of drive time a day, and then we have to be off duty for 10 hours before we can do it again. So teams is the only way to do it because then the truck can literally run around the clock. And there are companies out there that that's the only way they do it. And historically, teams have been husbands and wives, but there is a marked um, diminishing number of married couples doing that anymore. And so it's kind of gone to you got a lot of foreigners. When I say foreigners, I mean people, refugees from other countries and that, and they've got experience driving truck in their country, so it's an obvious choice for people like that, and they don't mind teaming up. Sometimes you'll see three and four guys in one truck, or a guy. There'll be two families, two complete families living in a truck. I've seen it before, and they do all that team type stuff. Um, but as far as the fuel goes, yeah, if you don't do exactly what the company tells you, and I'm not real sure why a guy would do that other than, he likes the showers in this other place a little bit better, so he'd rather fuel there. And it's just an over-regulated industry, and it's a lot. There's a lot of trouble a guy can get into as far as like if you get into an accident and they've got you on film texting and driving or something like that, which that's another thing. Um, you can get into a serious amount of trouble. But technology, that is one interesting thing I like to bring up is how technology has made that job way better for I don't look back with quite as much romanticism as some of the older guys to the days when we didn't have the phones, so we had to like call the customers and ask for directions, and you would always get somebody that's been working there for 40 years and they don't know their way in. Well, now we've got Google Maps, which there's that's a bit hit and miss, but it's better than what we had before. And it's caused a cultural shift, the technology in trucking, because we're so well connected in our trucks. You see far less of the culture in the truck stops of drivers connecting with each other because we've got all this technology at our fingertips. So it's one of those things where the positive change came at a cost, I think, and that kind of applies to a lot of things in technology, I think, where it kind of made our lives better, but it took away some of the community behind the struggle. If there's
Some of the CB community died down.
Oh gosh, CB radios. So when I was younger, when you would get closer to a major metropolitan area or a densely populated area, you could not get a word in edgewise on the radio. I mean, you literally had to turn it down because the collective sort of static noise from all of the density of radios within that area, you would literally have to turn it down because it would be a loud, conglomerated, screechy sound. Nowadays, it's almost dead silent, with the exception of like the rare individual that comes across talking about something, but you don't have none of the newer guys that are coming out nowadays use the radios. We use them because of the type of freight we haul. A lot of times when we're going into a customer, that's how we interact with them, how we check
But it's
them.
all business related at that point, as opposed to
It
the
is.
community that used to be around that.
Yeah, and I mean it still exists. It's just nowhere near the same in the same form. I used to spend a little
I
bit of money on the
imagine,
radio.
yeah, I imagine that it's less with the trucking community and more with the, just the enthusiast hobbyist community.
You've got a couple of guys out there that are running base stations that are putting out serious power. There's a guy that I hear every day, calls himself Mud Duck out in New Mexico, and I hear him talking to people all over. There's no way I would be able to talk back to him to where he could hear me, but to get a 27.185 megahertz signal from New Mexico to Indiana, and I've heard him all the way out to the East Coast, is so much power,
Well,
so high
my
of modulation that he's got to be bleeding over people's TV signal.
well, my foster father back in the day used to talk about signal skips. Basically, people talking to you from half a continent away and not knowing how the signal had reached from freaking California to freaking Iowa. And it's not because they were, overpowering or anything. It's just,
Yeah, you do have this situation where if you have the perfect uh, weather conditions, um, the signal can go up into the ionosphere or whatever and bounce off of that and come back down. So basically, it gets repeated off the atmosphere in a way that it's like that's where the signal come from. So it gets kind of doubled in its intensity. And then if you've got a big tower, base station or something, you're already putting out serious power. You can get all over the place. I've heard people all the way as far as Puerto Rico getting on there, and you can't hear what they're saying, but you can. The guy will say something along the lines of walkie talkie, Puerto Rico, walkie talkie, Puerto Rico," and it just kind of fades out as you move away from the area
that
where the
perfect spot. Yeah.
yeah, from the perfect spot, and that you got to think, man, oh man, that's quite a ways for a CB signal to get. You know, when there's so many other when there's so many other better ways to communicate nowadays, it's kind of cool though that people are still using that old kind of
Well,
maybe antiquated method, but it still works at short distances, so it's still effective, I think.
I do know some other podcasters that have their ham license and still like buying radios and using radios and talk about the different antennas that they get to talk to people all over the place. So the community is still there. It's just not used as much in business as it used to be. And I know that there's also a lot of projects to use like the CB radio as a backup internet provider just in case. It's just, abysmally slow and obviously dropped packets and things like that. But it's still there.
And it would probably work fairly well. It's just kind of the old-fashioned BBS style communicating, where it's just very low bandwidth data going back and forth. That would probably transfer relatively easily through a signal like that. There is kind of a crossover, I think, uh, in the Linux world with ham radios. There was an episode, I don't know how long ago, but it's had to have been close to a year now, on Linux Unplugged, where Noah was on. He was talking about ham radios because he's a huge enthusiast.
Well, I used to listen to Linux in the Ham Shack all the time.
Yeah, and they talk about things like they got these things like what they call it, tune your gutters, where some people might live in an HOA where they're not supposed to have antenna towers, so they'll literally run signal from their gutters. There's a way there's a way to make that happen, and it's nowhere near as optimized, but it works if you need it to work, and you can't your HOA won't allow you to put up a tower, which I would say if you were a ham operator, you got no business living somewhere like that anyway. But anyway, I digress. But that, yeah, interesting stuff.
I think that's going to have to be our innards.
Yep, that'll
Since
work.
since since sorry people, we had an issue where our original topic kind of fell through, and we basically had nothing for today. So
It didn't
this
didn't make a lot of sense to come up with anything on the spur of the moment. I wasn't well. Okay, so our original topic was going to be audio editing, and both Joe and I know
are
enough to
petty
have a conversation.
dabblers.
Yeah, petty dabblers. I mean, I do the editing on all three of the shows I'm on. Um, And
I've
each
done
one
the
of those,
editing for mintCast
yep, Joe
in the
does.
past.
Joe was doing it long before I was even here. Um, so we've got enough to talk about, but I think it would have been a better topic to have people like Eric around because he's used things like Reaper, and I think he said he's used Ardour in the past. I'm not sure, but then Majid as well because of Majid
His
knows the
other
right
podcast.
questions. Yeah, and he's got a level of curiosity, and he's able to put that curiosity into words a little bit better than I am. So I thought it'd be better to, well, we Joe and I decided it'd be better to wait until a time when we've got a fuller crew to talk about a topic like that because audio editing is one of those things that's really really important when you make these shows. You know, you could just take this feed right here and turn it into an MP3 and upload it, and it would be what it is. And I'm sure there's people out there that do that. But if you want to create a product um, that sounds professional, that sounds well made, it's worth the extra effort to not only learn how to create the audio in the best way possible, but also, and we'll talk about that on a later date because there's actually two recordings going on my machine, and then there's two different things going on Joe's as well. You know, we're streaming off to YouTube, but we're also creating discrete recordings of our individual microphones, and that all gets added to the final product. It's easier to create a more congruent audio that way, and well, anyway, we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, that'll do it for the Linux innards. Moving on to vibrations from the ether, and we've got some this time. What do you think, Joe? Go ahead.
All right, the first one is from Stan. And I do want to say that we did not include my responses, but I did respond to both of the emails that are in here today. Guys, I had not been listening for a while. Don't know why I ever stopped. I downloaded 2 years of episodes and I'm only now up to November 2022. Listening to back episodes is going slower than I would like, but almost every one of them is worth the time. They often cover topics and issues that I wrongly thought I had a good understanding. I connected to the last bit of the streamed session on 26 November. May not start listening to all newer sessions until I finish all the back sessions. Too many valuable gems to skip any of them. I'm looking forward to more consistent following and participating. I wanted to wait until I was all caught up before suggesting my topics of interest. I was thinking that you may have already have covered them, but since you have asked, I will throw them out for your consideration and possibly give everyone a chance to do research. I would like you to cover some tools that I find very useful when trying to connect remotely to Linux beginners. I have made the port changes to my router to allow the use of Gitso for making it easier for novice users to use my connection remotely with mouse and screen use. I also use Ramina and X2Go with my daily driver laptop and 3 other PC desktop. Works much better than a hardware KVM switch. I have concerns about the future of Gitso, Ramina, and X2Go. Using the public meet.jit.c remote software, I host a Linux beginner workshop on the fourth Tuesday of every month and co-host a vendor independent configuration and hardware workshop the first Thursday of each month. Meetings are free format and open to all. And there is a link, newlinux.org.
That
Now,
is, yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say that is actually really interesting. And don't ever anybody be afraid to ask us to cover topics that we might have covered in the past, because if one thing is true, these things tend to evolve. You know, even if we've talked about them, chances are there's been innovations, there's been improvements. You know, we might have learned something that we didn't know at the time. You know, so going back
I
over
mean,
these things that's interesting to the audience is I don't have a problem with that at all.
how many times have I talked about remote access or
Right.
tablets?
Yeah.
or anything like that. It changes. There's new stuff. I still find it interesting. If enough people start asking about remote access and VPNs, then it's time to start talking about remote
Yeah.
access and VPNs again. So now I have not heard of Gitso or Ramina. I do know X2Go, but that's because I
Remina
talk about
comes
X2Go.
comes by default on Ubuntu, on the
Okay.
desktop Ubuntu. Remina, that's their. I don't know if it's a canonical project, but it is their default, and it must work with Wayland. Otherwise, because I think I'll have to check on that a little bit better because I think Ubuntu is on Wayland by default now, and that was the thing about desktop sharing. Full stop was that you were not going to get the best results on Wayland. So that was one of the things that needed to be. That was
Yeah.
part of the reason why I think Canonical went to Wayland at one point. Was it in the 17 series or the 18
Yeah,
series?
something like that. They
Yeah,
switched hard to way to switch back.
they switched back immediately, and a lot of that was because of remote desktop, and it just wasn't
I
there yet.
mean,
So
yeah, I also have my concerns with like X2Go and any type of sharing application. I'm pretty sure X2Go is going to die when Wayland takes over unless some major changes happen. So yeah, I see the concern there, and I also, yeah, I use X2Go sometimes like a KVM switch just so I can control another machine, one of my own machines remotely. But I mean, if they're in the same room, then I might use Barrier instead. But yeah,
interesting stuff. We hope to hear from you in the future. And again, do not hesitate to jump on uh, roundtable with us on
and
Saturdays.
I'm gonna have to check. I don't know if Barrier works on Wayland.
That I have not actually tried any of these, and I would be. I mean,
Well,
obviously, I would be interested in desktop, remote desktop, just because I'm out there on the road. I mean, I live without it. I just
right.
SSH through WireGuard back into the servers, which is just a headless thing. But if
Yeah,
I had
well,
a way to,
X2Go is my tool of choice
yeah.
for X11 systems for remote access. But Barrier is a little bit different. So if you have two computers in like the same room and you have Barrier set up, then you can share the keyboard and mouse between them.
Oh, I think I've heard them talk about that on Late Night Linux a while back.
Yeah,
Um,
like Synergy. It's actually a
yeah,
fork of Synergy.
right on.
But yeah,
Uh, okay, so then we have another email from J Blackman 199. I just finished listening to 426.5, Cry Havoc and Bring Forth the Tablets of War. Fantastic name, by the way. That was Majid's doing. He's got quite a knack for it. And I'd like to respectfully disagree with something. I bought an old HB 2-in-1 and a Lenovo stylus that supports MPP 2.0 this semester. The total cost ended up being about $110 overall. I put Arch Linux with GNOME on it, and I've been using both Xernal and RNote for taking notes in class and do homework. I've got to say, I haven't been disappointed. I sit in between two iPad users in one class, and I wouldn't say that I've seen them do anything on their iPads that has made them worth the money to me. Plus, Xernal or Zernal and RNote are free. Good notes, isn't it? While stylus support isn't perfect, the iPad is better. I'd say the interface of GNOME and the stylus support of Linux makes a Linux tablet more makes a
make a
Linux
lot more
tablet make a
sense.
lot more sense than a Windows tablet. Signed, Jaden. And
Okay, I did respond to this and say that when we were talking about that, we were talking about multi-point pressure, which is, the MPP, or multiple pressure, the variable pressure that you can put on for like drawing and things. Now we understand that it's good for note taking, but I had mentioned that we only have anecdotal when it comes to that multi pressure, because none of us are really artists with a tablet. And Jaden, if you do know that the multiple pressure, the variable pressure works really well with Linux, then absolutely let us know. Um, Now, I do plan on testing out like Journal or Xjournal, or however you say it, to try out with a stylus, taking notes on one of my Linux tablets. Which, yeah, I really appreciate knowing how well that works. I'm glad that you're able to use that in school. Thank you for emailing us and letting us know about that. But yeah, if you do know anything about that variable pressure on tablets, then we would love to hear about it.
It sounds like he's just using it for note taking and just general text based stuff while in class or whatever,
Yeah,
which,
and that just hasn't been most of our jams. I mean,
you know,
we use tablets, but we tend to type instead of taking
I
notes.
do. I type everything nowadays.
Maybe it's just because we're old.
Yeah. Oh, so many people don't know how to type nowadays properly. And I don't think they're teaching it in school like they used to. Like in my day, it was taught on, I think we did half of this semester. I took a semester in ninth grade, and now I type like 70 words a minute.
Oh, hey, no, because computing classes back in the day, they weren't actual computing classes. They
Yeah.
were typing classes.
Well, this was just the most boring, and I remember it being terribly boring, but it's been terribly useful throughout my entire life of these very, very rote, mundane um, exercises of typing between two letters and that over and over and over, and it just seemed like it went on. But half the semester, now keep in mind we're talking the 80s, half the semester we were using an electric typewriter, and then the other half we were on the Apple IIc,
Apple
which,
OE2s, or
yeah,
yeah.
and because they kind of, I think their reason for doing that was just to kind of give us exposure to a couple of different types of keyboards and that. But I, like I talked to my kids now. I got one son; he's going to be a junior next year, and of course both of my boys that are grown, they never took any real typing class, and so they're stuck just kind of hunting and pecking. And I can't. That kind of,
They've taken programming classes, but they haven't
wow,
taken typing classes.
correct. And it feels like there's a trend these days of skipping right over that. That might be a mistake, in my opinion. So,
Well, like back in our days are a little bit different, but they're much more similar than what the days are now
yeah,
when it comes to school. Um, you didn't have handwriting classes unless you had messed up handwriting. I think it's kind of being treated the same way. You're not really being taught to type because you're being expected to know how to type because you've had exposure to computers your whole life. So it's your fault for not teaching your kids how to type.
oh boy, yeah, I can just imagine how that would go.
Mm.
Keep your fingers on the home row. Now type JY, 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 JY7, JY7.
Well,
I mean,
I actually had, well, on Linux computers, for my son, when I think it was my little ThinkPad, or was it the ThinkPad? It was one of the mini ThinkPads, I think, that I let my son use to learn to type on, and just gave him different typing applications so that he could learn to type faster, because he has dyslexia, and it took him a little bit more time to be able to type efficiently. So yeah, I kind of did, help him learn, but mostly by giving him fun games to play.
it's funny you bring that up because I was trying to teach the oldest boy, well, the oldest of my replacement children, um, how to type, and I asked him because I wanted to get an idea of where he was at. But these kids, somehow or another, they're picking up on a really effective hunting and pecking method and I'd swear he's hunting and pecking with like two fingers and the thumb on the space bar. He's got to be doing about 30 words a minute like that. It's amazing to watch because they are doing homework. They're literally doing their homework on these laptops, and they've kind of almost moved away completely to like work on actual papers. The real younger the younger kids are still using like actual paperwork, actual dead trees paper, but like the two boys, the one's in 8th grade, the other's in 10th right now, and it's all on a computer. And to watch these kids hunt and peck, I couldn't imagine learning it that way. And you got to know that to if you tried to teach them the proper way to type, now that they've had so much experience doing it that way, it would probably be tougher than somebody that's never sat behind a keyboard at all, you know.
All right. Well, thank you once again, Jaden. But we need to spin on here.
Yeah, this is going a lot longer than I thought it would.
Every time we think
Oh,
we're going to have a short show, this happens.
yeah, yeah, we need to stop saying that. Okay, we got nothing for check this out. Moving on to housekeeping and announcements. Thank you for listening to this episode of mintCast. If you see something you'd like to hear about, tell us. Send us an email at mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post at the mintcast subreddit. Chat with us on Telegram and Discord, or post directly on https mintcast.org. And I actually announced today's show on Reddit today, so I'm quite proud of myself. Next episode will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Sunday, December 24th, 2023. And there's a link in the show notes to get that converted to your time zone. Next roundtable live stream will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Saturday, December 16th, 2023. And there's a link to get that converted to your time zone in the show notes. Next roundtable live stream will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Saturday, December 30th, 2023. And there's a link to get that converted to your time zone in the show notes. Live stream information is at mintcast.org/livestream. Wrapping up, Joe, where can we get more of you?
Well, we do have one more announcement. I know that we're also going to be putting the spot into the overall mix of the audio, but HPR is having their New Year's show on the 31st into the 1st. So that's like 27 hours straight where you could potentially talk to all your favorite podcasters if you're into Linux podcasting. I know Joe Resington jumps on there. Sometimes I think the Jupiter Broadcasting guys might get on there, but I don't remember specifically. But a lot of the different people in the podcasting community will be on there. Plus, people just from all over the world getting on and talking about Linux, talking about whatever makes them happy, and talking about the new year. So, yeah. Definitely jump on there, hpr.org, I think it is, or something like that. Or just do a search for HPR New Year's show, and all the information will be there. It's on Mumble. It's really easy to access. But go ahead.
If you're listening to the audio only version, you would have heard the announcement at the beginning of the show, the official announcement, talking about the HPR Hacker Public Radio New Year's Eve show. There's going to be a stream too. The guy explained all that. So if you didn't catch it, just scroll back to the beginning and play it again. He pretty much outlines it.
Yeah. If you like the sound of my voice, you can catch me on a couple of my other podcasts. I am on the Linux Link Tech Show, tllts.org. I'm on Linux Lugcast, which is linuxlugcast.com. You can send me an email, jb@mintcast.org, or buy me a coffee with Kofi. Bill?
Well, first off, Moss couldn't be here with us today, but you can uh, find him on his show, Full Circle Weekly News. Fantastic Linux news podcast, by the way. Distro Hoppers Digest. You can email him bardmoss at pm.me. His Mastodon is at zyvla at hosttux.social. And all of his other content information can be found at itsmoss.com. Somebody literally wrote out itsmoss.com. As far as I'm concerned, you can get a hold of me at bill at mintcast.org. I'm Bill underscore H on Discord. My Mastodon is at WCHauser3 at fostodon.org. Also, check out my two other podcasts, Linux OTC and Three Fat Truckers. Majid couldn't be here with us today. You can email him at drmajid at mintcast.org. He's at Atypical Doctor on Twitter, or whatever they call it this week. Uh, he's Atypical Anesthetist on Instagram, and he has another show on Spotify called the Atypical Anesthetist Podcast. Eric also couldn't be with us today. You can hear and see him on this and the Linux OTC podcast, as well as the Linux Saloon and Linux Lugcast streams. If you'd like to get in touch with him, he could be reached by email at eric@mintcast.org. He's at Eric underscore Adams on Discord. There's a link in the show notes to his Telegram, his Matrix, and his Mastodon is at Eric Adams at fostodon.org. Links to all those in the show notes. Before we leave, we want to make sure to acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. Someone for the audio editing, God knows. Archive.org for hosting our audio files. Hobstar for our logo. InitRD for the animated Discord logo. Londoner for our time sinks and various other contributions. Someone for, by someone, me, for hosting the server which runs our website maintenance, and the Nextcloud server on which we host our show notes and raw audio. I got to figure out a way to read that correctly when I'm talking about myself. And last but not least, the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro we love to talk about. Thanks, Clam.
Thanks, Clam.
And Co. And it's a wrap.
Is it though? Is it really, or are we going to talk for another hour?
I'm going to get out of here. I got
right.
stuff to do.
Stop. Export audio. What show number is this? 427. 427. What's my name again?
Joe.
Okay, save. What bit depth? 16?
Just give me the best of everything. I gotta change this every time because the new versions of Audacity have a new.
Hello. How are you?
Let's see, mono flag. Yeah, edit metadata. There's a new dialog box for exporting.
What does he say?
I'm saying give him bunny ears.
He said, "Give me bunny ears."
I'm not gonna give you bunny ears.
Why?
I don't have the magic of an Easter bunny.
It's that. Don't kids still do that at school?
No, evidently not. I'm showing my age.
I guess, because I didn't know that wasn't a thing either.
All right.
Oh, all right.